Tyler Morgan had stopped counting days somewhere around month 7. Numbers lost meaning when survival became the only mathematics that mattered. 12 years old and living under Henderson Bridge on Portland's east side, where the Willamette River carved through the city, carrying secrets nobody wanted to acknowledge. The blue tarp he'd salvaged from behind Morrison's hardware 3 months back kept rain from destroying what little he possessed. A flattened cardboard box served as mattress. 3 plastic grocery bags contained everything. 2 changes of clothes that no longer fit properly. A winter coat whose zipper had broken last November. Toothbrush and paste stolen from a gas station bathroom. Water bottle with a crack along one side that leaked to fill too high. And the notebook with its pen clipped to the spiral binding. That notebook mattered more than any other possession. It kept him sharp, kept him observant, kept him alive in ways that food and shelter couldn't match. The only creature who acknowledged Tyler's existence was Rusty, a rust-colored mutt with one ear that stood crooked and ribs visible beneath matted fur despite Tyler's best efforts to feed him properly. He'd found the dog 4 months back, or maybe Rusty had found him. The distinction seemed irrelevant when 2 desperate creatures recognized kinship in each other's eyes. They'd been inseparable since. The dog sleeping, curled against Tyler's side every night, sharing warmth and loneliness and the strange comfort that came from not being completely alone, even when the world had forgotten you existed. 14 months since his mother, Jennifer Bennett, had died. The memory arrived in fragments now. Her laugh before pills transformed her into someone Tyler didn't recognize. The apartment that had smelled of vanilla candles she'd loved lighting on Sunday evenings. Then the candles stopped appearing. Then Jennifer stopped getting out of bed except to chase the numbness that opioids provided. Then the ambulance came with its flashing lights and urgent voices and social workers asking questions Tyler couldn't answer because nobody had taught 12-year-olds how to explain why mothers chose chemicals over consciousness, chose escape over the child who needed her present and whole. 2 months followed in bureaucratic limbo, temporary emergency placements where Tyler shuttled between overnight shelters and crisis facilities, while caseworkers filled out forms and searched for foster families willing to take a 12-year-old with trauma history. Group homes where staff rotated through shifts with mechanical efficiency, where his belongings stayed packed in those same plastic bags because permanent felt like word that no longer applied to his existence. Then the Miller family agreed to take him. The foster home lasted 3 weeks. They'd taken him in with practiced efficiency that suggested he represented simply another paycheck in a long line of temporary children moving through their home. 5 foster kids total ranging from ages 6 to 15. All sharing space in a house that smelled like cigarette smoke and resentment. Minimal food appeared at mealtimes calculated to meet legal requirements without approaching adequacy. Strict rules governed every aspect of daily existence. Bathroom schedules, television privileges, outdoor time measured in 15-minute increments. Mr. Miller's temper manifested unpredictably, triggered by infractions Tyler couldn't anticipate or avoid. Tyler had run after overhearing conversation he wasn't meant to hear. Mr. Miller's voice carrying from the kitchen where he spoke to his wife about the newest placement. Problem kids like this one aren't worth the trouble. System's paying us, but if he causes issues, we send him back. Not worth the headache, the casual dismissal. The reduction of Tyler's entire existence to cost-benefit analysis had crystallized something fundamental. Better to be homeless and invisible than housed and worthless. Better to make his own way than depend on adults who viewed him as burden rather than child deserving basic dignity. 11 months on streets had taught Tyler lessons no classroom covered. The first week had been terrifying. Hunger and cold and fear forming constant companions. Finding Rusty limping through that alley had saved them both. 2 damaged creatures recognizing mutual need. Together they'd learned routines and safe spots and the techniques required to remain beneath notice. Tyler had developed his notebook habit as insurance, documenting threats and patterns and license plates of vehicles that appeared too frequently in locations where children gathered. The cataloging gave him illusion of control in life that had spun wildly beyond his ability to influence outcomes. Every morning followed patterns Tyler had perfected through trial and error. Wake before dawn when the air still held night's chill, and fewer people occupied streets to question why a child moved through darkness without adult supervision. Pack everything into the plastic bags with methodical precision, leaving no trace of habitation beneath the bridge. Walked 2 miles to the shopping district where restaurants and offices generated steady streams of recyclable bottles worth 5 cents each at the Redemption Center on Burnside. Fill a trash bag systematically moving from dumpster to dumpster with practiced efficiency. Cash in at the center where the attendant had stopped asking questions months ago and simply counted bottles with mechanical disinterest. Buy day-old bread from the bakery. A can of dog food from the dollar store when funds allowed. Split bread with Rusty. Watch him devour canned food like it constituted a feast. Find public restrooms with working faucets. Wash face and hands with soap dispenser mounted on tiled walls. Try to look normal enough that people's eyes would slide past without registering concern or pity. Try to stay invisible. Memorial Park had become Tyler's sanctuary during daylight hours. Positioned 3 blocks from the bridge, with public restrooms that janitors actually cleaned twice daily. Water fountains that functioned reliably, and sufficient foot traffic that a quiet boy with a dog didn't attract unwanted attention. The park featured benches worn smooth by decades of use, oak trees providing shade in summer months, and a bronze fountain at the center where children played and parents watched, and life happened the way Tyler remembered it occurring before everything had collapsed. He observed this world with the detachment of someone studying a foreign culture through museum glass, yearning buried beneath practical recognition that the normal he'd lost couldn't be reclaimed through wishing. Wednesdays carried rhythms all their own. Around 10 in the morning, Mrs. Holloway would arrive with her canvas bag full of bread scraps destined for pigeons that gathered expectantly. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair she maintained in a neat bun and eyes that noticed things most people missed. She fed birds every Wednesday without fail, scattering crumbs in wide arcs while humming songs Tyler didn't recognize, but found somehow comforting in their consistency. She'd acknowledged his existence the first week he'd started frequenting the park, offering a simple nod, and occasionally wrapped carefully in paper napkins. A turkey sandwich or bag of chips left on the bench beside him when she departed. Tyler never thanked her directly because that would break the unspoken agreement they maintained. She didn't treat him like charity case requiring rescue. He didn't make her feel like savior fulfilling obligation. The arrangement worked precisely because neither party expected more than what was offered. From his usual bench near the western edge, Tyler watched families existing in ways that felt increasingly alien. Fathers pushing toddlers on swings, their laughter carrying across grass still damp from morning dew. Mothers spreading picnic blankets and unpacking lunches from actual Tupperware containers. Abundance that spoke of homes with kitchens and refrigerators and the luxury of planning meals, rather than scavenging them. Every Wednesday at 11:15, like some cosmic clockwork, he'd learned to anticipate the motorcycle arrived. A black and chrome beast that rumbled into the parking lot ridden by a man in his late 30s wearing a leather vest over dark shirt. The vest carried patches colorful and detailed, though Tyler had never approached closely enough to read specific text. The man possessed weathered face and strong build, the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside when he moved through crowds. But when his daughter climbed off the motorcycle's passenger seat helmet, comically oversized for her small head, the man transformed into something gentler. Protective instincts visible in the way he checked her jacket zipper and adjusted her backpack before releasing her to play. Sophie. Tyler had heard the father call her that once, the name drifting across the park on breeze that carried autumn's chill. She appeared to be 6, maybe 7, with dark curls that bounced when she ran, and laughter that sounded like wind chimes responding to summer storms. Every Wednesday she brought a paper bag filled with bread pieces, skipping to the fountain where ducks gathered with expectations formed by routine. She'd scatter food with unself-conscious joy that reminded Tyler of who he'd been before life taught him that joy was luxury the vulnerable couldn't afford. She always brought too much bread, excess floating in fountain water until maintenance crews cleaned it out. But her father never corrected this generosity. Just watched from his parked motorcycle while making phone calls that required concentration, but never enough to lose visual contact with his daughter. 3 weeks ago, Tyler had noticed something that made instincts develop through months of hypervigilance, scream warnings he couldn't articulate, but knew better than to ignore. A white sedan, newer model, windows tinted dark enough to obscure occupants. It had circled Memorial Park 3 times while Tyler sat on his usual bench, sorting bottles by redemption value. The next week, same car, same slow cruise around the park's perimeter. Movements too deliberate to constitute coincidence. This past Monday, it had appeared again, and Tyler's pen had moved across notebook pages with meticulous precision. Oregon license plate KLM 8492. Dates and times. Observations about two men inside who never emerged, but whose attention remained fixed on playground areas where children played under assumptions of safety that Tyler knew was illusion at best. Today felt different in ways Tyler couldn't initially articulate. The white sedan was back, pulling into the parking lot 3 spaces from the motorcycle. And this time it didn't leave. It simply parked, engine idling, 2 shapes visible through tinted windows. Tyler's hand moved automatically to his notebook, pen clicking open, gaze shifting between the sedan and Sophie playing obliviously at the fountain 30 yards away. His pulse quickened as he followed sight lines and understood with certainty what the men were watching. Not the park generally, not the fountain as architectural feature. Sophie specifically. Her movements, her isolation from her father, who stood 50 feet away with phone pressed to his ear. Back partially turned while he dealt with whatever conversation demanded his full attention. Every survival instinct screamed at Tyler to stay invisible. Not your problem. Invisible kids stay invisible by minding their own business. Getting involved means getting noticed, and getting noticed means getting hurt. Or worse, getting sent back into a system that had already demonstrated its capacity for institutional cruelty. His fingers tightened on Rusty's collar, the dog pressing closer, sensing distress that Tyler couldn't hide, despite years of practice maintaining emotional equilibrium. But even as his brain calculated risk and recommended the self-preservation that had kept him alive through 11 months of homelessness, something deeper was screaming warnings he couldn't ignore. The sedan's doors opened simultaneously, coordinated movement that spoke of practice and planning. 2 men emerged with casual deliberation designed not to attract attention, appearing simply as adults approaching the fountain for innocent reasons. Derek Walsh moved first, tall and athletic with baseball cap, pulled low enough to shadow features, closing distance from Sophie's left side, while his partner Brad Miller, shorter and stockier, with jacket inappropriate for the mild weather, approached from her right. They were triangulating, cutting off escape routes she didn't know she needed, closing in on a 6-year-old child who believed the world was fundamentally safe because her father had never given her reason to fear otherwise. Tyler watched the pieces align with the same cold clarity that had kept him alive on streets where predators came in forms most people never anticipated. The men's movements were too synchronized, too purposeful. Body language broadcasting tension that someone experienced in reading threats couldn't misinterpret. His heart hammered against ribs. Adrenaline flooding systems that prepared for fight or flight, while his conscious mind still argued for the flight response that had served him well for 11 months. Rusty barked once, sharp and urgent, the sound cutting through morning air and Tyler's paralysis simultaneously. It happened with terrifying speed, the kind of velocity that transformed normal Wednesday morning into nightmare. Derek's hand clamped over Sophie's mouth before she could process danger or scream for help. Her paper bag dropped, scattering bread across concrete in pattern that looked almost artistic in its chaos. Her small body went rigid with shock that precedes terror. Every muscle locking as instinct recognized predator, even if conscious thought couldn't yet comprehend what was happening. Brad grabbed her legs with practiced efficiency, lifting, and together they pivoted toward the sedan, moving quickly now. All pretense of casual behavior abandoned in favor of speed. Sophie's eyes went wide above Derek's palm, pupils dilated with fear that no child should experience, and her muffled cries were barely audible beneath the hand that sealed her mouth. They were dragging her, literally dragging a 6-year-old girl toward a vehicle whose license plate Tyler had documented 3 times in his notebook, toward whatever fate awaited children unfortunate enough to be selected by predators who operated in daylight because they understood that witnesses rarely possess courage to become participants in their own rescue narratives. Every survival instinct reached crescendo pitch, screaming imperatives that contradicted everything experience had taught him. Run, just run. This isn't your fight. You're 12 years old, 95 pounds, facing 2 grown men who outweigh you by over 100 pounds each. You can't stop them. This isn't your problem. Invisible kids survive by staying invisible. by avoiding situations where good intentions collide with harsh reality and produce only more trauma. Let someone else help. Let the father who's 50 feet away handle this. Let the system that's supposed to protect children do its job. Just run. But his legs weren't listening to survival instincts that had served him well for 11 months. His legs were already moving, carrying him forward before conscious decision could override the deeper imperative that caring about others, helping those who couldn't help themselves mattered more than personal safety. Rusty's bark became continuous now, the dog understanding that Tyler was charging into danger and unable to follow. Collar held by hand that had suddenly released it. Tyler's throat opened and sound emerged, raw and desperate and impossibly loud for someone who'd spent months making himself small and quiet. "Hey, leave her alone." The words tore from him as his feet pounded across grass, then pavement, closing the distance between safety and catastrophe with speed born of absolute certainty that doing nothing would cost something more precious than whatever injury awaited him. The collision when it came jarred every bone in Tyler's frame. 95 pounds of desperate momentum crashing into Derek Walsh's 220-pound mass, with impact that physics suggested should have been completely ineffective. But surprise counted for something, and the angle Tyler had chosen drove his shoulder into Derek's ribs at precise moment when the man's balance was compromised by holding a struggling child. Derek stumbled sideways, grip on Sophie loosening just enough that she twisted free, her scream finally breaking through to pierce the morning air with sound that would haunt everyone present for years. Sophie ran, small legs pumping frantically toward her father, who dropped his phone and started sprinting the moment her scream registered. Face transforming into mask of rage and terror, she ran toward safety, toward survival, toward the father who'd been 50 feet away when 50 feet proved to be exactly the distance predators needed to create opportunity. She ran because a homeless boy nobody knew existed had thrown himself between evil and its intended victim without hesitation or calculation of personal cost. Brad Miller's hand closed on Tyler's shoulder like a vice constructed of meat and bone and rage at having their carefully planned abduction disrupted by interfering child who should have known better than to make himself visible. Tyler felt himself yanked backward with force that lifted him partially off his feet, body twisted to face Derek, who'd recovered balance, and whose expression carried nothing but cold calculation about what happened next to children who complicated operations that were supposed to proceed smoothly. Derek's voice was flat, matter of fact, almost bored when he spoke, and somehow that made it more terrifying than if he'd screamed threats. "You just made a big mistake, kid." The first blow caught Tyler across the face with enough force that his head snapped sideways, neck muscles straining, and copper taste flooded his mouth immediately as something split inside his cheek. White stars sparked across his vision, pain blooming bright and immediate, but he tried to pull away, tried to create distance, tried to do anything except stand there and absorb what was coming. There was nowhere to go. Brad's grip remained absolute, holding him in place for what followed. The second punch drove into his ribs, and Tyler heard something crack inside his chest with sound like green wood breaking. Sharp pain that meant something fundamental had broken in ways that wouldn't heal quickly. He couldn't breathe suddenly, couldn't think past the agony radiating from his torso. His knees buckled without conscious decision to fall. He hit pavement hard, palms scraping across concrete that embedded gravel into skin. And the pain that had seemed overwhelming intensified as boots connected with his ribs, his back, his legs. Methodical assault designed to inflict maximum damage efficiently. Professional. That was the word that would occur to Detective Morrison later when examining injuries. Professional beating delivered by someone who understood human anatomy well enough to know where kicks cause pain without necessarily killing immediately, though internal bleeding remained very real possibility. Tyler curled instinctively, trying to protect his head and stomach and anything vital. Arms wrapped around the skull while his body absorbed impacts that would leave bruises lasting for weeks and fractures requiring months to heal properly. Rusty was barking, snarling, lunging at the men but unable to help. Tyler's consciousness began fragmenting, reality breaking into disconnected pieces that his brain couldn't quite assemble into coherent narrative. Pain became everything. Pressure where boots connected with flesh. The taste of blood. Sophie's screams for her daddy mixing with other voices suddenly shouting. The distant rumble of motorcycle engines roaring to life as the father's brothers, who'd been gathering for weekly meetup, realized something terrible was happening. Then the beating stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Tyler heard running footsteps, car doors slamming, tires squealing against asphalt as the sedan fled with Derek and Brad inside. Their planned abduction disrupted, but their freedom maintained because getting caught mattered less than completing the job. And completing the job had become impossible the moment one 12-year-old decided that invisible didn't mean powerless. Voices surrounded Tyler now. Multiple voices shouting commands and questions and expressing concern in tones that registered more as noise than meaningful communication. Someone was checking his pulse, hands gentle despite their size, voice deep and controlled even as it carried urgency. "Stay with me, kid. Help's coming. Just stay with me." Tyler forced his eyes open through swelling that was already closing them. Vision swimming with tears and blood and the distortion that came with skull fracture he didn't yet know he'd sustained. Above him, a face came into focus slowly, features resolving through the haze. Lucas Cross knelt beside him, leather vest visible even through Tyler's failing vision. And the patches were finally close enough to read. Iron Rider's MC president. His expression held controlled fury mixed with something that looked like respect, or maybe disbelief. Emotions warring across features that had seen violence but perhaps never witnessed courage quite like what this homeless child had demonstrated. Behind Lucas, Sophie stood crying but safe, alive, untouched except for fear that therapy would eventually help her process. That was what mattered. Tyler had bought her those crucial seconds. He'd made himself matter for once, even if the cost was everything. Tyler's hand reached out weakly, fingers finding Rusty's rust-colored fur where the dog had pressed close. Whimpering with distress he couldn't articulate except through sound and proximity. Tyler's voice emerged as barely a whisper, blood bubbling at his lips. "Good boy. Protector." Then darkness rose up and claimed him with mercy that unconsciousness provided, pulling him down into depths where pain couldn't follow. And the question of whether he would survive the night remained unanswered. Lucas caught something that had fallen from Tyler's pocket during the beating, fingers closing around a notebook whose pages fluttered in breeze that carried October's chill. He opened it automatically, attention divided between the injured child and whatever documentation this object contained. His breath caught as pages revealed their contents. Sketches filled every available space. License plates documented with dates and times and locations. Patterns cataloged with meticulous precision that spoke of mind trained to observe threats others missed. The white sedan's plate number appeared 3 weeks back. First entry dated September 20th. Subsequent appearances tracked with detail that suggested Tyler had recognized something wrong long before today's attempted abduction. This homeless kid hadn't just acted on impulse. He'd been watching, tracking, protecting people without anyone knowing he existed. The notebook contained dozens of other observations, delivery truck schedules, suspicious vehicles, individuals whose presence at the park occurred too frequently to constitute coincidence. Tyler Morgan had appointed himself guardian of Memorial Park, using his invisibility to notice what others ignored, documenting evidence that would eventually break open a kidnapping ring operating across the Pacific Northwest. But nobody had known. Nobody had seen him. Nobody had cared that a 12-year-old was trying to keep children safe when the systems designed for that purpose had failed so completely. Paramedics arrived with equipment and urgent voices, kneeling beside Tyler to assess injuries that became more concerning with each measurement they took. Vitals unstable, internal bleeding suspected based on abdominal rigidity, and blood pressure dropping faster than indicated simple bruising. They worked with efficient speed born of seeing trauma frequently enough that shock had been replaced by practiced competence, starting a 4 lines and stabilizing neck and loading Tyler onto stretcher, with movements that looked almost choreographed. Lucas stood back but didn't leave. Couldn't leave. Watching as the child who'd saved his daughter was transported toward ambulance that would rush him to Oregon Medical Center, where surgeons would spend 6 hours repairing damage that should have killed him. Sophie clung to Rebecca Cross, who'd arrived within minutes of Lucas's frantic phone call. her small body shaking with aftershocks of trauma that hadn't yet processed into conscious understanding of what nearly happened. Her first words were question that would echo through Lucas's mind for days. "The boy saved me, Daddy. Is he okay?" She refused to release her mother, hypervigilance making her flinch at sounds and movements that previously wouldn't have registered. But she was alive, breathing, safe. Because a child she'd never noticed who'd been sitting on a bench 30 yards away for weeks while she fed ducks had chosen action over survival when the moment demanded someone be brave enough to intervene. Detective James Morrison arrived as paramedics were loading Tyler into the ambulance. His veteran cop's instincts immediately recognizing that this incident contained layers requiring investigation beyond simple assault. He took statements from Lucas, from witnesses who'd seen portions of what occurred, from other Iron Riders members who'd been arriving for the weekly gathering when chaos erupted. He examined Tyler's notebook with growing recognition of its value, turning pages that documented not just today's attempted abduction, but patterns stretching back weeks. His voice carried professional respect when he spoke to Lucas privately before the ambulance departed. This kid was tracking kidnappers for weeks. He saw the pattern nobody else noticed. This isn't random heroism. This is a child who'd been trying to protect people without anyone knowing he existed. The ambulance departed with lights flashing and sirens wailing, carrying Tyler towards surgery that would determine whether courage proved fatal or merely life-altering. Lucas stood in Memorial Park's parking lot, holding a blood-stained notebook, watching his daughter cling to his wife, processing emotions that ranged from relief to guilt, to a debt so profound he couldn't yet articulate its full weight. Jackson Carter had arrived, the club's sergeant-at-arms, whose road name Diesel reflected both his physical presence and his reliability. His expression asked questions Lucas hadn't yet formulated answers for. Lucas spoke with finality that broke no argument. "Get the club together. Emergency meeting tonight. Everyone who can attend." Diesel nodded once, understanding that something significant had shifted. That this Wednesday morning had created obligations that required the full Brotherhood to address. He pulled out his phone and began making calls, his voice carrying the authority necessary to convey urgency without explaining details that would be covered at the meeting. Within minutes, messages were cascading through the network that connected 300 riders across Oregon. Brief texts conveying only essential information. Emergency meeting, clubhouse tonight, mandatory attendance. At Oregon Medical Center, Tyler was rushed to surgery with prognosis that made nurses exchange glances that conveyed more than words about his chances of surviving the night. 3 fractured ribs, one of which had caused internal bleeding that required immediate intervention. Skull fracture severe enough that neurologists were standing by to address brain swelling if it progressed beyond manageable parameters. Extensive bruising, lacerations, and trauma consistent with professional beating delivered by someone who understood human anatomy well enough to cause maximum damage without killing instantly. Though delayed death from internal complications remained a very real possibility. The hospital identified him as John Doe initially, 12 years old approximately, homeless based on clothing condition and lack of identification. No family to contact, no emergency contacts, no insurance information, nothing except a dung that animal control had already collected at the scene. The system cataloged him the way it cataloged all the invisible people who cycled through emergency departments. Another statistic, another tragedy, another child the world had failed so completely that strangers proved his only hope for survival. Lucas remained in the hospital corridor outside surgery, pacing with restless energy that suggested a man accustomed to taking action, suddenly forced into passive waiting. He called Rebecca to confirm Sophie was home and safe, had spoken briefly with Diesel to confirm the meeting was organized. But mostly he paced and thought about the child who'd thrown himself at armed kidnappers to save a daughter he'd never met. The debt felt crushing in its weight, profound in its implications, demanding response that Lucas couldn't yet fully articulate, but knew with absolute certainty his club would honor. His phone rang with Detective Morrison's number, and Lucas answered immediately, desperate for information or distraction or anything that provided sense of progress when everything felt frozen in amber of uncertainty. Morrison's voice carried weight that suggested news more complicated than simple updates about Tyler's condition. We ran the sedan's plates, registered to a shell company, but we tracked it back through financial records. Derek Walsh, former Portland PD, forced out 5 years ago for excessive force complaints. Lucas's blood ran cold, hand tightening on phone hard enough that plastic creaked beneath his grip. It gets worse, Morrison continued. He's connected to a string of child abductions across the Pacific Northwest. 7 cases in 3 states, all targeting children of high-value families. Your daughter wasn't random, Lucas. Walsh specializes in planned kidnappings. The implications cascaded through Lucas's mind with terrible clarity. This hadn't been opportunistic crime, hadn't been random predators selecting vulnerable target. Sophie had been marked, researched, targeted specifically because someone with knowledge of Lucas's family and routines had provided intelligence to professional kidnappers. The question of who possessed both access and motivation to facilitate his daughter's abduction opened possibilities too disturbing to contemplate without evidence. Morrison continued, voice carrying warning that made Lucas's jaw clench. Walsh has connections. His old captain, Richard Webb, is still on the force. Webb's been blocking investigations, protecting Walsh through channels I'm still mapping out. This goes deeper than street kidnapping, Lucas. This is organized, well-funded, and connected enough to police infrastructure that building a case requires navigating politics carefully. Your club is involved now, whether you want it to be or not. Walsh knows who disrupted his operation. That homeless kid became a witness, and witnesses who can identify Walsh tend to have short life expectancies. The implications were clear. Helping Tyler meant inheriting enemies who operated at levels requiring resources and caution Lucas hadn't anticipated. But walking away meant abandoning a child who'd risked everything for Sophie, meant failing the most basic test of character and honor that defined what the Iron Rider's MC supposedly stood for. There was no choice, really. There had never been choice. The debt existed, and debts got paid regardless of complications. By 8 that evening, the Iron Riders clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. 300 members squeezed into a converted warehouse that typically accommodated large gatherings comfortably, but now felt claustrophobic with bodies in tension. Chapters from across Oregon had sent representatives, some driving hours to attend emergency meeting that had been called without explanation. Allied clubs had members present out of solidarity and curiosity, understanding that something significant had occurred to justify this level of mobilization. The air was thick with leather and denim, and the particular energy that came from warriors gathering to address threat requiring collective response. The clubhouse itself reflected decades of brotherhood. Concrete floors marked by oil stains and tire tracks, pool tables occupying one corner, fully stocked bar along the eastern wall, and walls covered with photographs spanning 40 years of history. Tonight, every member who could physically attend was present, and those who couldn't had dialed in through laptops propped on tables, their faces watching from distant cities as Lucas stood at the front of the room with Sophie sleeping in Rebecca's arms in the back office, safe and whole because of a kid nobody had known existed until this morning. Lucas spoke with authority earned through 15 years of leadership, but also with emotion he didn't try to hide, because hiding emotion in moments like this suggested weakness rather than strength. A homeless kid, 12 years old, took a beating meant for my daughter, 2 grown men, armed professionals who've been kidnapping children across 3 states. And this kid charged them without hesitation, without weapons, without backup, threw himself between my daughter and whatever fate those men had planned for her. The room had gone completely silent. 300 battle-hardened individuals who'd seen violence and hardship and the worst humanity offered, listening to the story of a child who demonstrated courage most adults would never possess. Lucas continued, his jaw tight with emotion that threatened to overwhelm professional demeanor. Doctors say he'll survive, but recovery is going to be long and complicated. I've covered his medical costs, but that's the bare minimum. This kid has no family. Mother died of overdose 14 months ago. No father listed anywhere. Ran from foster care after 3 weeks. He's been surviving alone with just a day, sleeping under Henderson Bridge, eating from dumpsters, and yesterday he saved my daughter's life. Rebecca stood from where she'd been sitting near the back, Sophie still asleep in her arms, and her voice carried the strength that had made her founding member of the Women's Auxiliary. Kid's got no family. Nobody came forward when his mother died. No relatives. No support system. Nothing. He's been invisible for 11 months, and he used that invisibility to document threats at Memorial Park, tracking kidnappers nobody else noticed. This isn't about throwing money at a problem and walking away. This child has nothing, and he gave everything to protect our daughter. Diesel rose next, his massive frame commanding attention through presence rather than volume. We owe him life debt. Code is code. If someone bled for any of our families, we'd move heaven and earth to honor that debt. Doesn't matter that he's a stranger. He stopped being a stranger the moment he threw himself between Sophie and those kidnappers. He saved one of ours, which makes him ours if he'll have us. But the response wasn't uniformly supportive, and the debate that followed demonstrated the complexity beneath the Brotherhood's unified exterior. A younger member named Ash, barely into his 20s, raised concerns that others felt but hesitated to voice. We're a motorcycle club, not a foster agency. Kid needs professionals, therapists, social services. We're not equipped to handle a traumatized 12-year-old. What happens when CPS starts asking questions about bikers taking custody of homeless minor? What happens when media decides this is exploitation instead of genuine help? His words generated murmurs of agreement from some corners. Pragmatic considerations that couldn't be ignored even when urgency demanded action. But Raymond Morrison, bull to everyone in the club, a veteran in his early 70s who'd been homeless himself after returning from Vietnam, stood with expression that suggested he'd been waiting for this particular challenge. I was where that kid is now. Came back from deployment with nothing. No job, no place, just me and nightmares that wouldn't stop. This club found me sleeping behind a grocery store and decided I mattered when the system had already written me off. They gave me work, gave me purpose, gave me family when I thought I'd lost the ability to connect with anyone. Bull's voice grew stronger, carrying conviction earned through lived experience. This is what we do. We protect our own, and anyone who bleeds for our family becomes family. That's not sentiment, that's code. The system failed this kid the same way it failed me. We don't get to walk away just because helping him is complicated. We show up when it matters, or nothing we claim to stand for means anything. The vote, when it came, reflected both the unity and the fractures within the Brotherhood. Lucas laid out the proposal clearly. The club would ride to the hospital when Tyler was stable enough for visitors. To demonstrate solidarity that couldn't be dismissed or ignored, they would provide protection, resources, support, whatever was needed to give a 12-year-old boy the childhood he'd been denied through circumstances beyond his control. The commitment would be comprehensive and long-term, not temporary charity that evaporated when inconvenience exceeded good intentions. 287 hands rose in favor. 13 opposed. The majority was overwhelming, but the dissent was visible. A reminder that even bonds forged through shared purpose could strain under pressure of decisions that demanded sacrifice without guarantee of positive outcome. Diesel addressed those who'd voted against the motion with respect, that acknowledged their concerns while making club's position clear. You voted your conscience, and that's respected. But once the vote passes, we stand united. This kid gets our full support, all of us. Anyone who can't commit to that needs to step aside now. Nods came from the dissenters. Acknowledgement that disagreement about approach didn't negate loyalty to the club's collective decision. They would support Tyler because the Brotherhood had voted to support him. Because unity mattered more than individual reservations. Because sometimes you trusted your brother's judgment even when your own doubts persisted. After the meeting dispersed into smaller conversations and planning sessions, Diesel pulled Lucas aside with expression that suggested news requiring privacy. Detective Morrison called while you were speaking. They found Walsh's license plate on traffic cameras heading south toward California border. FBI is involved now because kidnapping across state lines triggers federal jurisdiction. But Morrison says Walsh's old captain, this Richard Webb, is actively blocking investigation, claiming insufficient evidence, suggesting the abduction attempt was misidentified, basically running interference that suggests he's getting paid to protect Walsh. Lucas processed implications that kept expanding like ripples from stone thrown into still water. Sophie had been targeted by professional kidnappers. protected by corrupt police captain. Saved by homeless boy who was now himself a witness capable of identifying Walsh, which meant threats extended beyond the immediate crisis into complications that would require sustained vigilance to address safely. Helping Tyler meant inheriting enemies, accepting risks, committing resources to protection that extended indefinitely because threats like Walsh didn't simply vanish when initial attempts failed. But the alternative, walking away and leaving a 12-year-old to face those threats alone, wasn't acceptable to Lucas or to the club that had just voted overwhelmingly to honor the debt owed to a child who demonstrated courage none of them could dismiss as anything less than heroic. The commitment was made, the die cast, and whatever came next would be faced collectively rather than individually. Lucas made one more phone call that night, scrolling through contacts to find Angela Kane, an attorney who'd worked with the club on various community initiatives and whose expertise in family law had made her the logical choice for navigating the bureaucratic complexities ahead. She answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the efficient professionalism of someone accustomed to late-night calls from clients who needed immediate guidance. "Lucas, what's wrong?" He explained the situation concisely, hitting key points without unnecessary detail. 12-year-old homeless kid saved Sophie. Club voted to provide custody and support. Needed legal counsel for navigating CPS and establishing guardianship. Angela listened without interrupting, her silence conveying attention rather than judgment. And when Lucas finished, her response came after pause that suggested she was already calculating obstacles they'd face. "That's going to be complicated. Very complicated. Social services doesn't typically approve motorcycle clubs taking custody of vulnerable minors. Even when intentions are pure, you're looking at home studies, background checks, psychological evaluations, ongoing oversight. They'll fight you on this." Lucas spoke with determination that Angela knew well enough not to challenge. "Then we fight back. Kid deserves family that shows up." We showed up. If the system wants to argue that's not good enough, we'll demonstrate why they're wrong. Angela's response was pragmatic but not discouraging. "I'm in. We'll need to move carefully. Document everything. Prove you can provide stable environment. But if you're committed, we can make this work. I'll start filing paperwork tomorrow. First step is getting you cleared as emergency foster placement while Tyler recovers. That buys us time to build a permanent case." At Oregon Medical Center, surgery was concluding after 6 hours of meticulous work, repairing internal damage that would leave scars but shouldn't prove fatal if infection didn't complicate recovery. Tyler remained unconscious, body preserved in medical coma while swelling stabilized and systems recovered from trauma. Machines monitored vitals that remained concerning but showed improvement, gradual progress towards stability that doctors had doubted was achievable when he'd first arrived. In the waiting room outside ICU, Lucas sat alone with notebook he'd retrieved from police after they'd photographed every page as evidence. He turned pages slowly, studying sketches and observations that revealed a mind trained to notice details others missed. Patterns documented with precision that spoke of intelligence undimmed by circumstances. Tyler Morgan had spent 11 months invisible, using that invisibility to protect people who didn't know he existed, who wouldn't have noticed him even if they'd passed within arm's reach. He'd cared about strangers' safety more than his own survival, had maintained moral compass that homelessness hadn't corrupted, had chosen courage when every lesson life taught suggested self-preservation was only rational response to a world that didn't care whether you lived or died. That level of character deserved better than the streets had given him. Deserved family, stability, opportunity to become whoever he was capable of becoming when basic needs weren't consuming all available energy and attention. The debt Lucas felt wasn't obligation imposed by external code, but recognition that some actions demanded response transcending calculation of personal cost. Tyler had given everything for Sophie. The least Lucas could do was give Tyler a chance at life worth living. As dawn broke over Portland, painting hospital corridors with pale light that suggested new beginnings, Tyler's eyes fluttered open briefly for first time since surgery. Consciousness lasted only seconds, barely long enough for Nurse Patricia to register that he was waking. But his first words were clear enough to note in medical chart, despite slurred speech that came with skull fracture and medications. "Rusty. Where's Rusty?" Then awareness faded again. pulling him back under before Patricia could respond. But she made note. Patient's first concern upon regaining consciousness was his dog. Not his injuries, not his pain, just his dog. She didn't know that Lucas was already handling Rusty's situation, had retrieved the gain from animal control yesterday, had him vet-checked and groomed, and was keeping him at the Cross property until Tyler was stable enough to be reunited. Didn't know that 300 motorcycles would roll into hospital parking lot tomorrow. That cavalry was coming. That invisible boy's life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Pain arrived before consciousness, deep and throbbing in Tyler's ribs with every shallow breath he managed. His skull pulsed in rhythm with heartbeat that felt too loud, too present, announcing damage that would require months to heal properly. When he finally forced his eyes open, fluorescent lights stabbed through pupils that hadn't adjusted yet. An antiseptic smell filled nostrils, accustomed to bridge dampness and river mud. The hospital room materialized slowly, white walls and beeping machines, and the face of Nurse Patricia, hovering with practiced efficiency that suggested she'd been monitoring his return to awareness. Her voice carried gentle warmth meant to comfort patients emerging from trauma. "Welcome back, sweetheart. You've been out about 14 hours. Try not to move too much. You've got 3 fractured ribs, skull fracture, and we had to stop some internal bleeding. You're lucky to be alive, lucky." The word felt foreign applied to someone who'd been beaten unconscious on park pavement, but Tyler supposed she was correct in the most technical sense. His heart continued beating. His lungs continued drawing air despite ribs that protested each expansion. That counted for something. Dr. Jenkins arrived within minutes. Middle-aged physician with kind eyes that had delivered bad news frequently enough to have perfected the balance between honesty and hope. He explained injuries using medical terminology Tyler only partially understood. Words like contusion and hematoma that sounded serious without conveying the full reality of recovery, timelines stretching months into uncertain future. Then came the part that made no sense whatsoever. The information that couldn't possibly be accurate. Dr. Jenkins spoke with steady voice as he delivered news that should have felt like relief but only created more confusion. Your medical bills have been paid in full. Cash. Someone walked in yesterday and settled everything. Surgery, recovery, projected costs for physical therapy, medications, follow-up appointments. You don't owe this hospital a single cent. Tyler's hand stilled on the sheet he'd been clutching, processing words that carried weight he wasn't sure how to hold. Who? I don't have money. I don't have anyone. Dr. Jenkins' offered smile that suggested he wished he had better answers. I can't tell you more than what I know, but someone out there believes you're worth investing in. Focus on healing. Let us worry about the rest. Before Tyler could process this information, before he could formulate the dozens of questions forming in his battered mind, another visitor appeared at his door. Detective James Morrison wore plain clothes with badge clipped to belt, his weathered face carrying an expression that mixed professional detachment with genuine concern. He pulled a chair beside Tyler's bed and spoke with careful gentleness of someone interviewing traumatized child who'd already been failed by too many adults. The questions were straightforward enough. What had Tyler seen? Why had he intervened? Did he know the men who attacked him? Tyler answered as best he could, though memories of the actual beating had already started to blur at edges, his brain mercifully protecting him from full horror of it. What he remembered clearly was Sophie's scream, the decision to run toward danger instead of away from it, the certainty that doing nothing would haunt him more than whatever injuries resulted from action. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Tyler with expression that mixed admiration with something close to concern. You saved Lucas Cross's daughter. Do you know who Lucas Cross is? Tyler shook his head slightly and immediately regretted the movement as pain spiked through his skull. Morrison chose his words carefully, delivering information that explained context without editorializing. Lucas Cross is the president of the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club. They've got over 300 members across Oregon. They're not a gang, not in the criminal sense. But they're not your average community organization either. Controversial reputation. Some people see them as protectors of their neighborhoods. Others see them as intimidating. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Morrison paused, ensuring Tyler was following despite exhaustion, pulling at consciousness. Here's what you need to understand, kid. These aren't bad guys. I've worked with Lucas on community initiatives. He's helped us with neighborhood watch programs, youth mentorship, things like that. But they're not simple either. They live by their own code. Loyalty, brotherhood, protection of their own. And right now they feel they owe you. That's complicated. It means they're going to want to help you, probably in ways that are overwhelming. Just know you don't have to accept anything you're not comfortable with. You're in control here. Tyler wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what any of this meant for his future, but exhaustion was pulling at him again. Morrison seemed to sense this and stood to leave. Just before reaching the door, he turned back with expression that conveyed respect earned rather than given. For what it's worth, what you did was incredibly brave, incredibly stupid, but incredibly brave. That little girl is alive because of you. After Morrison left, Patricia returned to check vitals. As she adjusted his pillow, she spoke quietly, almost conspiratorially. There's been someone outside your room every single hour since you arrived, taking shifts. They won't leave. Security tried to make them go, but they're not causing trouble. Just sitting in the hallway, waiting. She glanced toward the door, her voice dropping even lower. I've never seen anything like it. Bikers rotating guard duty for a kid they don't know. Whatever you did, it mattered to them. Tyler's eyes followed her gaze to the small window in his hospital room door. He couldn't see anyone from his angle, but he could sense presence beyond it. Someone watching, someone waiting, someone who felt they owed debt to a 12-year-old homeless kid who'd been invisible his entire life until one impossible moment changed everything. 24 hours after the incident, Tyler lay in his hospital bed in that strange state between sleep and waking, his body finally beginning to heal enough that pain had dulled to constant ache rather than sharp agony. Morning light filtered through blinds, casting stripes across white sheets that smelled like industrial laundry detergent. The room was quiet except for rhythmic beeping of monitors and distant sounds of hospital coming to life with day shift. Then he heard it, distant at first, so faint he thought he might be imagining it. The low rumble of an engine, then another, the sound grew, building like approaching thunder. Deep mechanical growl that seemed to vibrate through the hospital's foundation. Tyler's eyes opened fully, brow furrowing in confusion as the sound kept growing, multiplying until it wasn't just loud but overwhelming. A wall of noise that had nurses abandoning their stations and rushing to windows. From his bed, Tyler couldn't see the parking lot, but he could hear commotion in the hallway. Excited voices, nervous voices, someone saying, "Oh my God," over and over, the sound of running footsteps as security personnel mobilized. And beneath it all, that incredible rolling thunder of what had to be dozens. No, hundreds of motorcycle engines all arriving at once in perfectly orchestrated formation. 300 motorcycles pulled into Oregon Medical Center's parking lot in display that would be talked about for years to come. They arrived in organized waves, chapter by chapter, the Iron Riders, MC leading the procession with Lucas Cross at the front. But they weren't alone. Allied clubs from across Oregon had shown up in solidarity. Devil's Advocates, Road Saints, Thunder Ridge. Their own colors and patches representing network of brotherhood that spanned hundreds of miles. The bikes gleamed in morning sun, chrome and paint and leather, ridden by men and women who'd taken time off work. Driven hours, united for single purpose. To honor debt owed to a 12-year-old kid who'd saved one of their own. Hospital security didn't know what to do with 300 bikers assembling peacefully in their parking lot. They called police immediately. Voices tight with anxiety, expecting trouble, expecting violence, expecting something to go terribly wrong. But when police arrived with sirens silent out of respect for hospital environment, they found something entirely different. The bikers had organized themselves in neat rows. Military precision that suggested discipline rather than chaos. They weren't revving engines or causing disturbances. They were just there, standing beside their motorcycles, waiting with patient determination that comes from people who understand power of solidarity. Lucas approached the hospital's administrative entrance, flanked by Diesel and two other senior members. He found Dr. Reyes, hospital administrator, who'd been called down from her office to deal with what security had described as potential crisis. Lucas spoke calmly, respectfully, absolutely unwavering. We're here to see Tyler Morgan. All of us will wait however long it takes. We don't cause trouble. We just honor debts. That boy saved my daughter's life. These people have come to pay their respects, to let him know he's not alone anymore. We understand if you can't accommodate everyone at once. We're willing to work within your rules. Reyes looked out at 300 people who'd shown up for a homeless child nobody had cared about 48 hours ago, and something in her expression softened. She made a decision that would either be brilliant or get her reprimanded by the board. Small groups, supervised visits throughout the day, no more than 5 people in his room at a time, and only if he consents to visitors. He's been through trauma, and I won't have him overwhelmed. Lucas nodded immediately, extended his hand, shook hers with genuine gratitude. You have my word, Umang. We'll follow every rule you set. The compromise spread through the assembled crowd quickly. Members settled in for what would clearly be all-day vigil. Some sitting on their bikes, others standing in clusters, talking quietly. A few went to get coffee from the hospital cafeteria, leaving cash tips that were triple the bill. They were prepared to wait as long as necessary, to show this kid that 300 people had driven across state lines because his life mattered, because his courage deserved recognition, because the code demanded they demonstrate that nobody who bled for their family would ever face the world alone again. On the 3rd floor, Patricia knocked gently on Tyler's door before entering. Her name tag caught light as she moved to his bedside, eyes bright with something Tyler couldn't quite identify. Tyler, sweetheart, you have visitors. They've asked permission to come see you. You can say no if you want, but I think you should say yes. Tyler's voice came out confused, weak from injuries and medications. Who would want to visit me? Patricia smiled with expression that suggested she understood something he didn't yet. Everyone, apparently. The door opened wider and Lucas Cross walked in, his presence filling the small hospital room. He was followed by Diesel, whose road name suddenly made perfect sense given his size. Rebecca Cross entered next, her face showing traces of tears recently shed. A senior member named Bull completed the group, but it was the 5th person who made Tyler's heart stop completely, who made everything else fade into background noise that didn't matter. A younger club member, probably early 20s, carried a wiggling bundle of rust-colored fur wrapped in clean blanket. Rusty. They'd found Rusty. The dog's tail was wagging so hard his whole body shook, and the moment he saw Tyler, he started whining and squirming, desperate to reach his boy, to confirm that Tyler was alive despite the blood and violence and terror of their last moments together. The young member approached the bed, carefully mindful of medical equipment, and set Rusty on the mattress with movements that suggested he understood how much this reunion meant. Rusty immediately crawled up to Tyler's chest, licking his face, whimpering with joy and relief, pressing close like he was trying to merge with Tyler's body and never be separated again. Tyler broke, completely and utterly broke. His arms wrapped around Rusty and he sobbed into the dog's fur. 11 months of loneliness and fear and isolation pouring out in great shaking gasps that hurt his fractured ribs but couldn't be contained. He cried for his mother, for the life he'd lost, for the beating and the pain and the terror. But mostly he cried because someone had cared enough to save the one thing that mattered most to him. Because someone had seen him, had understood what Rusty meant, had taken action to reunite them when Tyler had been utterly powerless to protect the only family he had left. Lucas spoke quietly, giving Tyler time to process emotions that needed release. We pulled him from animal control yesterday, paid the fees, got him vet checked, made sure he had all his shots, got him cleaned up. He's yours, kid. He's always been yours. Once Tyler's tears had subsided to quiet hiccups and Rusty had settled against his side, warm presence that anchored him to reality, the others in the room quietly stepped back toward the door, giving Lucas space to pull chair close to hospital bed. He sat slowly, his large frame somehow gentle in the way he positioned himself at Tyler's eye level. Not looming, not intimidating, just present. Lucas spoke with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. You gave my daughter her life. You didn't hesitate. You didn't stop to think about what it would cost you. You just acted. That kind of courage is rare, especially in someone who has every reason to look out for only themselves, who's learned the hard way that the world doesn't give much back. He paused, his eyes holding Tyler's with intensity that made the boy feel seen in ways he'd never experienced. I need you to understand what that means to me, to my family, to everyone standing in that parking lot right now. You saved Sophie when you had no obligation, no expectation of reward, nothing except the knowledge that a child needed help and you were the only one willing to give it. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are, Tyler Morgan. What came next was delivered not as sales pitch, but as simple statement of fact, an offer laid out with complete transparency. Lucas explained that Tyler's medical care was fully covered, not just for current injuries, but ongoing for as long as he needed it. Physical therapy, counseling if he wanted it, checkups, everything. The club had already handled it. Then came education. Lucas had enrolled Tyler in Riverside Academy, private school with small classes and teachers who actually cared. Enrollment was complete, supplies purchased. He could start whenever he was ready. No pressure, no timeline, just opportunity waiting when he was prepared to take it. Housing was next. Lucas and Rebecca had guest house on their property, small but complete with own bedroom, bathroom, living space. Tyler and Rusty were welcome there for as long as they needed, not as guests, but as family, when Tyler got older. If he was interested, there were apprenticeships available through legitimate club businesses, motorcycle repair, community outreach programs, youth mentorship, skills he could build life on, honest work that paid well and meant something. But the last part, the most important part, Lucas delivered with careful weight: family, the Iron Riders, protection, mentorship, belonging. 300 people who will show up when you need them, who will teach you, support you, and expect nothing but that you be yourself and try your best. That's what we're offering. Tyler's face had gone carefully blank, walls he'd built on streets slamming back into place. His voice turned hard, defensive, carrying edge of someone who'd learned that offers sounding too good to be true inevitably came with hidden prices. I don't take charity. I've been offered help before. Foster families who said they cared. Social workers who promised things would get better. Systems that were supposed to protect me. It always comes with strings. Always. People want something even if they don't say it up front. I'd rather be on my own than owe someone something I can't pay back. Lucas didn't flinch at the resistance. If anything, seemed to have expected it. Maybe even respected it. This isn't charity, Tyler. It's a debt. You bled for my family, in our world, in the code we live by. That means something permanent. It creates bond that doesn't break. He gestured toward the door, toward hundreds of people waiting outside. Every person out there understands what you did. They know what it cost you. And they're here because honoring that debt is who we are. This isn't transaction. This isn't temporary. You saved my daughter. And that makes you ours now if you'll have us. Lucas's voice dropped lower, more personal. You don't have to join the club. You don't have to do anything except be a kid. Go to school, play with your dog. Figure out who you want to be without worrying where your next meal comes from or where you'll sleep at night. Let people care about you. Learn what it feels like to be part of something. And if you want to walk away when you're 18, you can. No strings, no guilt, no debt collected. Just let us help until then. Let us give you the childhood you should have had all along. Tyler wanted to argue, wanted to find the catch. The hidden price tag that always came with adults offering things that sounded too good to be true. But as he looked at Lucas's face, at Rebecca standing quietly by the door with tears in her eyes, at Diesel's solid presence and Bull's gentle nod of agreement, he couldn't find the lie. These people had shown up. They'd found Rusty. They'd paid his hospital bills without being asked, without knowing if he'd accept anything else they offered. They'd done all of it before ever having this conversation, before knowing if their investment would be acknowledged or reciprocated. Before Tyler could formulate response, there was knock at door. Detective Morrison stepped in, nodding respectfully to Lucas before addressing Tyler directly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought you'd want to know this immediately. Your notebook, the one with all those license plate observations. It became critical evidence. We used it to track the pattern of that white sedan and connected it to 6 other attempted abductions over the past month. This morning, we executed warrants that led to 7 arrests in the recovery of 4 children who had been taken. Full kidnapping ring, Tyler. We brought it down because you were paying attention when nobody else was. The room went absolutely silent. Tyler stared at the detective, unable to process what he was hearing. 4 children, 4 kids who were alive, who were going home to their families. Because he'd sketched license plates and notebook, while sitting alone in park trying to stay ahead of threats nobody else noticed or cared about. Morrison continued, his voice filled with genuine respect. You've been protecting people without even knowing it, kid. Maybe it's time someone protected you. After Morrison left, Lucas spoke again, his words landing with weight of absolute truth. You're not invisible anymore, Tyler. You never should have been. And if you let us, we'll make sure you never have to be again. Tyler looked down at Rusty, felt warm weight of dog pressed against ribs that would heal, but would always carry a reminder of this moment. He thought about 4 children going home, about 300 people waiting in parking lot because they believed his life had value, about 11 months of being cold and hungry and alone, of survival strategies and invisible routines and constant fear that came with having nothing and no one. And then he thought about what Lucas was offering, not charity, family. His voice came out as barely whisper, but it was most important word he'd ever spoken. Okay, 24 hours later, complications that Lucas had warned about began materializing with speed that suggested they'd been inevitable from the moment he'd made commitment to help Tyler. Elena Foster arrived at hospital with expression that blended professional concern with skepticism earned through 16 years of Child Protective Services work. She reviewed Tyler's file methodically. Homeless minor, no guardians, no family, and now motorcycle clubs seeking involvement in his care. Every instinct developed through years of protecting vulnerable children was firing warnings she couldn't ignore. Her conversation with Lucas in hospital corridor was cordial but firm. I understand your intentions are good, Mr. Cross, but motorcycle clubs seeking custody of traumatized minor. The system doesn't typically approve these arrangements. There are protocols, background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations. This will require significant oversight, and there's no guarantee approval will be granted. My job is protecting Tyler's interests, not accommodating your club's desire to help. If I determine this placement isn't appropriate, he goes into the system. That's not negotiable. Lucas kept his voice controlled but equally firm. We're prepared for oversight. We want to do this right. Kid needs stability, not another foster placement that fails him. We can provide what he needs. Safe home, education, medical care, family that actually shows up. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for chance to prove Tyler's better off with us than anywhere else the system might place him. Elena's response carried weight of authority she'd earned through protecting children when others had failed. I need to interview Tyler privately. No club members present. My assessment will determine next steps, and that assessment will be based solely on what serves his best interest. Regardless of your club's involvement or how many motorcycles showed up at this hospital. The private interview happened that afternoon. Just Elena and Tyler in hospital room, configured to feel less clinical, more conversational. Her questions were direct, probing, designed to identify coercion or pressure that vulnerable children might not recognize as manipulation. Do you feel safe with Lucas Cross? Are you being pressured to accept his offer? Do you understand you have other options? Foster families who are already approved? Group homes with professional staff? Placements the system has vetted thoroughly. Tyler's response was honest in a way only someone who'd survived on streets could be honest. Stripping away politeness to deliver truth that mattered more than social niceties. They gave me back my dog, fed me, gave me room, school. They care what happens to me. I'm safe, have meals. Rusty's healthy for first time in months. Isn't that what matters? What the system's supposed to provide? He paused, meeting her eyes directly with gaze that suggested he understood exactly what she was evaluating. I've been in the system before. It failed me. Put me with family that treated me like paycheck, not person. I ran because staying was worse than streets. These people haven't failed me. Not yet. Maybe they will. Maybe this falls apart. But right now they're here. They showed up. That's more than anyone else has done since my mom died. Elena processed his words carefully. seeing transformation in Tyler that couldn't be dismissed. Clean, fed, healing, engaged rather than shut down. But protocols existed for reasons. Safeguards against well-meaning adults whose good intentions evaporated when reality proved more complicated than initial commitment suggested. Her voice remained professional, but not unkind. I need to conduct full investigation. Home study, background checks, interviews with club members. This decision will take time, and during that time you'll remain under hospital care or temporary foster placement. I can't approve permanent custody based on 2 days of good behavior, regardless of how compelling the circumstances. Meanwhile, media discovered the story with speed that suggested someone had deliberately leaked information to maximize attention. Local news picked it up first. Homeless boy saves biker's daughter. MC offers home. The story spread rapidly across regional outlets, then social media. And by evening, it was trending nationally. Tyler's face, his name, his entire life suddenly became public property, dissected and discussed by strangers who had no connection to what had actually happened, but felt entitled to opinions about how situations should be handled. Reactions came in waves, contradictory and overwhelming. Positive comments flooded in, celebrating Tyler's heroism and the club's compassion, calling it beautiful example of community and chosen family, proof that good people existed in unexpected places. But negative responses were just as loud, maybe louder, fueled by suspicion and prejudice that motorcycle clubs couldn't be trusted with vulnerable children regardless of circumstances. Internet commenters questioned the club's motives, suggesting exploitation for public relations, calling it indoctrination of vulnerable child who couldn't possibly consent to arrangement when power dynamics were so skewed. Conspiracy theories emerged about gang recruitment tactics, about trafficking, concerns about dangers that armchair experts claimed to identify despite having zero first-hand knowledge of situation. Within 48 hours, reporters showed up at Riverside Academy, attempting to interview students about Tyler, trying to get photos, seeking comments from teachers who'd never met him. They camped outside cross property with telephoto lenses pointed at guest house, attempting to capture footage of boy who'd become unwitting media sensation. Tyler, who'd spent 11 months perfecting invisibility to survive, suddenly couldn't escape visibility, no matter how desperately he wanted to retreat into anonymity that had once felt like prison, but now seemed like sanctuary compared to exposure that made every moment feel invaded. The breaking point came when social services received anonymous complaint about gang involvement with minor, potential danger to child's well-being. Formal investigation was opened. Elena Foster was assigned not just to conduct home study, but to determine whether placement with cross-family constituted appropriate environment or represented risk requiring immediate intervention. Same system that had failed to protect Tyler when he was homeless, that had placed him with foster family that treated him like burden, was now threatening first stable home he'd had in almost a year. The club's response was immediate and coordinated, demonstrating organizational capacity that skeptics claimed didn't exist within motorcycle culture. Lucas hired Angela Kane, attorney specializing in family law who'd worked with Iron Riders on legitimate community initiatives and whose expertise would be essential for navigating bureaucratic complexities ahead. She handled all media inquiries, issued statements, setting firm boundaries, made clear that Tyler was minor, whose privacy would be protected by any legal means necessary. Club members, without being asked, created privacy perimeter around cross property and Riverside Academy. Not threatening, not illegal, just present, making sure reporters couldn't get close enough to harass child who'd already endured more trauma than most adults faced in lifetime. Lucas sat down with Tyler in guest house one evening after a particularly difficult day where 3 different journalists had tried to approach him despite school security. His voice was steady, serious, carrying protective instinct that had become increasingly paternal. You don't owe anyone your story, not reporters, not the internet, not people who think they know what's best for you without ever having met you. This is your life, not their headline. We'll protect your privacy as much as legally can. And if you want to speak out, that's your choice too. But it has to be your choice, not because you feel pressured or obligated. 1 week after rescue, Tyler was discharged from hospital with list of medications, strict instructions about physical therapy, and strange sensation of walking toward something instead of away from it. Rebecca drove them in family SUV rather than motorcycle. Lucas in passenger seat. Rusty alert in back beside Tyler, sensing significance of this journey, even if he couldn't understand destination. The guest house sat behind main residence. Small structure with cream-colored siding and red door that looked like it belonged in storybook rather than real life. When Rebecca unlocked door and stepped aside to let Tyler enter first, he stood frozen in doorway, unable to move forward. Clean. That was first thing hitting him with force that threatened to overwhelm careful control he had maintained. Clean walls, clean floors, clean windows, letting in actual sunlight. Small living area with couch and television. Bedroom with real bed, not cardboard. With sheets smelling like laundry detergent and comforter thick enough to keep out any cold. Bathroom with hot water and towels stacked on shelf. Tiny kitchen with refrigerator Rebecca had already stocked with simple food she thought 12-year-old might like. It was more than Tyler had lived in even before his mother died. More than he'd imagined having access to when survival had been measured in days rather than dreams. The overwhelm made his chest tight. Hands shake. Walls he'd built threatening to crumble completely. Sophie appeared in the doorway that afternoon. Small frame, hesitant, eyes still holding shadows of what had happened in park. She didn't speak initially, just stood there holding something behind her back. Tyler, sitting on couch with Rusty's head in his lap, gave her what he hoped was encouraging nod. She stepped inside carefully, then thrust forward piece of paper, drawing created with crayons depicting park scene, fountain, little girl, and figure that could only be Tyler with cape flowing behind him, standing between her and two dark scribbled shapes. At top in careful letters someone had helped her spell. "Thank you for saving me. You are my hero." Tyler took drawing with hands that trembled, studying every crayon stroke, every color choice, every detail of how 6-year-old had processed trauma in his sacrifice. He carefully folded it and put it in pocket where he'd keep it until paper wore thin from repeated handling. "You're welcome, Sophie. I'm glad you're safe," she smiled, small and genuine, then ran back to main house, her fear of him seemingly dissolved by acknowledgement that he was safe too, that heroes could be human and vulnerable and worthy of gratitude expressed through crayon and construction paper. 2 weeks post-rescue, Elena Foster concluded her investigation with thoroughness that suggested she took responsibility seriously. She toured guest house, reviewed cross-family dynamics, spoken with club members, consulted with Detective Morrison about kidnapping incident, examined Lucas and Rebecca's backgrounds, evaluated club's legitimate businesses and community programs. Her findings painted a picture of unconventional arrangement that nonetheless provided stability Tyler desperately needed. But complications persisted. Captain Richard Webb, Derek Walsh's protector within police department, called Elena directly with anonymous tip about MC's gang activity, suggesting placement with club was dangerous despite lack of evidence supporting claims. Elena recognized intimidation tactics when she encountered them and reported interference to her superiors. But pressure from law enforcement complicated approval process in ways that required judicial intervention. Public hearing was scheduled to determine permanent custody. Judge needing to approve arrangement given MC involvement and media attention surrounding case. Courtroom packed with supporters and skeptics. Reporters filling back rows. Tension thick enough that bailiff maintained heightened alertness throughout proceedings. Arguments presented followed predictable lines. CPS attorney, obligated to question arrangement, regardless of personal opinion, raised concerns about motorcycle club lacking traditional family structure. Questioned whether environment was appropriate for traumatized minor. Suggested more conventional placements might serve Tyler's interest better. Angela Kane defended with evidence of Tyler's transformation. Medical records showing excellent care. School enrollment demonstrating proper educational support. Psychological evaluation indicating he was thriving in current placement. And most importantly, Tyler's own testimony delivered privately to judge in chambers where crowd couldn't influence his honesty. Judge spoke to Tyler alone. No attorneys present, just 12-year-old and judicial authority trying to determine what truly served child's best interests. Do you feel safe with cross family? Do you want to stay there? Have you been pressured or coerced? Do you understand other options exist? Tyler's answers were clear, direct, carrying conviction that came from knowing exactly what he was choosing. They gave me family when I had nothing. I'm safe, fed, going to school. Have my dog. For first time in 11 months, I'm not just surviving. I'm living. People think bikers are scary. I thought that too before. But they showed up when nobody else did. System failed me. Foster care failed me. These people haven't, and I trust them. Judge's ruling delivered after reviewing all evidence and testimony acknowledged unconventional nature of arrangement, but couldn't dismiss outcome that was undeniable. Tyler was thriving. Formal foster placement was approved, with Lucas and Rebecca becoming legal guardians. 6-month review required. Standard oversight, but immediate custody granted based on preponderance of evidence, suggesting this placement served child's best interests above convention or prejudice. Outside, courthouse media circus erupted with reporters shouting questions. Lucas made brief statement about Tyler finding family who loved him, emphasized that privacy should be respected moving forward, then ushered everyone to waiting vehicles before additional questions could complicate victory they'd just secured. But victory came with warning. Diesel delivered privately after they'd returned to cross property. Captain Webb left courthouse too fast. This isn't over for him. Detective Morrison confirmed when he called later that evening. Walsh had vanished after failed abduction. No leads on location, Webb running interference, claiming insufficient evidence, suggesting abduction attempt was misidentified, basically protecting Walsh through channels Morrison was still trying to map. Sophie had been targeted specifically. Someone had marked her. And until they understood why and identified who had provided intelligence to kidnappers, threat remained active and evolving. Lucas hadn't told Tyler about ongoing threat, wanting him to heal without additional fear. But reality couldn't be avoided indefinitely. That evening in guest house, when Tyler confronted him about increased security and private phone calls and Rebecca's worried glances, Lucas made decision that honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, mattered more than temporary comfort built on incomplete information. Lucas explained carefully, age-appropriate version that didn't minimize danger but didn't traumatize unnecessarily. Derek Walsh, the man who tried to take Sophie, is still out there. He targeted her specifically. We don't know why yet. Until we find him, we're being careful. You're safe, Sophie's safe, but we're watchful. And that's why you're seeing club members around more frequently. Tyler's fear returned immediately, child's logic suggesting solution that seemed obvious. I brought danger to you by saving her. Maybe I should go, keep you safe by leaving. Lucas's response was fierce, protective, leaving no room for misunderstanding. No, you're not going anywhere. You didn't bring danger. You stopped it. We protect our own. And you're ours now. Whatever threat exists, we face it together. That's not negotiable. Rebecca joined them, her voice carrying equal conviction. Family means staying when it's hard. You stayed when Sophie needed you. We stayed now that you need us. That's how this works. Tyler's transformation moment came then. Realization dawning that family meant standing together rather than isolating to protect others. That strength came from unity rather than solitary burden-bearing. His voice was quiet but certain. Okay, together then. Phone rang moments later, Lucas answering with expression that darkened as Detective Morrison's urgent voice delivered news requiring immediate response. We found Walsh's hideout. You need to see this. It's worse than we thought. Much worse. At Walsh's abandoned warehouse, Morrison showed Lucas photographs and evidence that transformed their understanding of threat they faced. Wall covered with surveillance photos, not just of Sophie, but dozen other children, all connected to high-value families, all documented with schedules and routines and vulnerabilities. Organized kidnapping ring, targeting specific kids based on intelligence that required inside source. Information it was coming from someone with access to families, someone feeding Walsh details that enabled precise targeting. The files showed Williams hadn't just accessed school records. She'd been cross-referencing club community programs, youth sports registrations, public events where MC families gathered, building comprehensive profiles through seemingly innocent administrative access across multiple institutions. Most disturbing discovery was evidence suggesting traitor existed within circle of trust. Patricia Williams, school staff member with connections spanning multiple organizations, Someone close enough to observe patterns without raising suspicion. Morrison's warning was stark. Walsh didn't work alone. Ring is bigger than we knew. Williams was feeding information from her position at Riverside Academy. Until we identify any other sources, everyone's suspect. Trust no one new. Watch everyone carefully. Lucas returned home without telling Tyler full scope of threat, but security increased subtly. MC remained on high alert. Investigation continued quietly while Tyler settled into new life, unaware how deep danger really went. 6 months later, Elena's review showed continued success. Honor roll, therapy breakthroughs, healthy attachments. Her voice when delivering assessment carried genuine pleasure at outcome that had exceeded her initial skepticism. Custody remains appropriate. Review in 12 months will determine long-term status. But nothing I have observed suggests this placement should be disrupted. You're doing well, Tyler. Keep doing what you're doing. Ongoing threat managed. Walsh in federal custody. Webb terminated. Facing prosecution. Ring dismantled. But vigilance continued. Detective Morrison's breakthrough had come from cross-referencing warehouse evidence with traffic cameras. Silver Honda appearing repeatedly. Registered to Patricia Williams. Riverside Academy Administrative Assistant. Financial records showed irregular deposits totaling $40,000 over a 6-month period. Phone records confirmed regular contact with burner phone traced to Walsh's known locations. The inside source had been identified. Simultaneous raids happened at dawn. Williams arrested at her apartment. Walsh caught in Eugene, planning another abduction. Senator's daughter. 7 additional conspirators identified through financial records and phone data. Entire kidnapping ring dismantled. Operation that recovered evidence linking them to 14 attempted abductions across Pacific Northwest over 18-month period. 1 year after rescue. Anniversary at Memorial Park. Fountain where everything changed. Tyler 13 now, taller, healthier. Sophie 7 feeding ducks with same joy but greater awareness of surroundings that would probably never fully fade. Mrs. Holloway approached with recognition. Elderly woman with silver hair, whose weekly routine of feeding pigeons had included leaving sandwiches for Invisible Boy. You remember me, I fed pigeons here. Fed you too. Tyler tears up. You saw me when everyone looked past me. Mrs. Holloway smiled. I knew you'd be okay. You noticed things, cared about others, even with nothing. That character doesn't disappear. I'm glad you found family. You deserve better than streets gave you. Family gathering that evening. Cross property, Tyler, Lucas, Rebecca, Sophie, Bull still going strong at 73. Diesel and Maria, 300 people who'd shown up. Lucas spoke with pride and emotion. 1 year ago, homeless boy ran into fire while adults watched. That boy is now my son, standing here, looking at how far we've all come. I realized something. We didn't save Tyler. He saved us. He gave me purpose beyond club. Gave Rebecca son she'd always wanted. Gave Sophie brother who'd die for her. Made us better, all of us. To Tyler. Crowd echoes. To Tyler. Tyler's response. I was nobody. Had nothing. Expected nothing. Then I heard Sophie screaming. And something said run. Help her, save her even if it kills you. I didn't know that girl would become my sister. That her family would become mine. That one decision would change everything. My mom said help people even when nobody helps you. That's what makes us human. Not what we take, what we give. I gave everything when I ran toward those kidnappers and got everything back 1,000 times over. This toast isn't to me. It's to everyone who believed in homeless kid when they had no reason, who fought for me when world said I wasn't worth fighting for, who taught me family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. Thank you for giving me life worth living. Later that night, Tyler's room. Mother's photo in frame, new photo beside it, Christmas family picture. Tyler, Sophie, Lucas, Rebecca, all wearing matching sweaters Sophie insisted on, all smiling. Tyler writes, Dear Mom, I know you can't read this, maybe can't hear, but I need to say it. I'm okay. Better than okay. Happy. I have family now, real one. Dad who teaches me about motorcycles and life. Mom who makes pancakes and never gives up. Sister who loves me so much, it's annoying sometimes. I made it, Mom. I survived. And didn't just survive. I found everything you ever wanted for me. I still miss you. Always will. But I'm not alone anymore. I know now that helping people matters. That kindness matters. That running toward fire instead of away is what makes us human. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for loving me even when everything fell apart. I'll make you proud. I promise. Your son, Tyler, folds letter, places beside photo, turns off light, goes to bed. Epilogue comes quietly, not with grand ceremony, but with ordinary moment that contains everything. Tyler, 16 now, 4 years since rescue, standing on cross-property roof with Lucas, stars bright overhead, cold enough to see breath. Can't sleep, Lucas asks, just thinking about how far things come, about that day in park. I think about it too, finding you on that pavement, how close I came to losing Sophie, how you gave everything. I didn't know it would change everything. That's what makes it matter. You didn't do it for reward. Lucas paused. I've met a lot of people, Tyler. Most are exactly what you expect. But you're genuinely good down to your bones. Tyler looks at him. This man who'd saved him, who'd become father, mentor, friend, everything. I still think about Walsh sometimes, about what could have happened. He's where he belongs. Ring's broken. Sophie's safe. You're safe. That's what matters. Below life continues. Sophie 10 now, growing up. Rebecca in kitchen. Bull on porch. Diesel's kids running in yard. Family living, breathing, existing in ways Tyler once thought impossible for people like him. Lucas grips his shoulder. Stop waiting to lose this family. You're not going to lose us. Not because of mistakes, not because of fear. This is permanent, Tyler. This is forever. Tyler speaks to stars, to mother watching somewhere. I did it, Mama. I was good. Whatever happened, I was good. Stars don't answer, don't need to, because Tyler Morgan Cross, 16 years old, had proven something fundamental. That one act of kindness could change the world. Not through power, not through wealth, through love, through sacrifice, through choosing to be good when being good cost everything. His mother had planted the seed, taught him to be kind, to see people, to help without expecting return. Tyler had watered that seed with every choice, every sacrifice, every moment he chose kindness over safety. And now the forest was growing, not just for him, for everyone he touched. Sophie, who learned courage, Lucas, who learned second chances matter, Rebecca, who learned motherhood comes in many forms, Bull, who learned hope exists even at 73, Diesel, who learned family means showing up. Hundreds, thousands, millions of lives touched by one notebook, one choice, one moment when Invisible Boy decided being seen mattered more than being safe. That was legacy. That was everything. Tomorrow there would be more work, more chances to help, more seeds to plant. But tonight he was home, and that was enough. That was everything. The coldest nights show you who has the warmest hearts. Tyler Morgan Cross proved that a single choice could ripple forward forever. That being good wasn't weakness. That kindness was the strongest force in the world. He walked inside, the door closed, the light stayed on, and somewhere in the infinite darkness above, his mother was smiling.